Hey everyone, Coach Mike here, and welcome back to another episode of the Language of Leadership podcast. I'm joined today by Anh Dao Pham. Anne, how are you doing today in sunny California?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
And we're super grateful to have you here today. You have been an incredible leader as the Vice President of Product and Program Management at Edmunds.com, and you've been focused on leading technical projects to completion for over 2 decades. You've been described as a servant leader at Edmunds. So while your list of personal accomplishments is impressive, you'll never see her shine the spotlight on herself. You have incredible accolades from authors and luminaries in the field, such as Robert Cialdini, who described your work as a rare gift to project managers. We're super excited to have you here today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Could you give us just a very brief introduction into your background and how you arrived at where we are today?
Sure. I am a first generation Vietnamese American. So my parents actually immigrated from Vietnam just 3 days before Saigon fell in 1975. And at that time, my sister was 18 months old. I was not yet born. When they eventually landed to the US by way of Guam and France, my dad actually found a job listing through a newspaper and landed a job as a draftsman at the state of California in Sacramento. And that's where I was born and raised. So I very much empathize with people who have Asian parents and have gone through struggles. But I was really the lucky one. So I was the youngest in my family, and my parents really endured a lot of hardship to get us there. My sister had an adjustment to make coming over to the US, but really I was very sheltered as a child. And while we were not rich or wealthy, my parents really provided me everything that I needed. And in exchange for that, they just expected me to excel at the work that I did. So I was expected to get straight A's and overachieve. And I did for the most part. You know, I was a straight A student. I did everything that I thought was going to please them. When my sister achieved things, and I tried to follow in her footsteps as her being a role model to me. And I ended up graduating valedictorian in high school. I went to public school at UCLA for college as a math major. And then I stumbled actually on technology because at the time I was really good at math and I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. But I knew I didn't want to be an accountant. And I didn't want to work with money. And I did like teaching math, but I didn't think it was going to pay the bills. And I thought my parents would be pretty upset with me if I didn't achieve for more. So I went into technology and did IT consulting and have really done that for the last 20 years. I worked at Deloitte Consulting as a consultant initially. I worked in another consulting company after that. I ended up at Ticketmaster for several years where I met my husband. Then I went to a startup, and now I work for Edmunds, and I've been here for a little bit over 11 years. So I've had a pretty long career in technology, and now I've had 20 years in project management, and I also work in product development, really in software development, building products for our website.
Well, Anne, I think you know how I already feel about speech and moot court and debate, but it's wonderful to speak with another person who had such a positive experience there. And I think what you're sharing about not only Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, but just generally those type of events, which is powerful, is that they also teach us how to be good listeners. They teach us how to be open to the diverse backgrounds of other people, not just us blabbing on the stage.
Yeah, I mean it's a really a wonderful skill to be able first to be able to get up in front of somebody, so or a large audience. At the time, our school was not huge, but I think we were 400 or 500 kids. So when you won the speech, you had to get up in front of the entire school and give that speech, and that is something that you don't get a lot of opportunity to do in a lot of education. And so I think that that's really wonderful because later in your career, if you're going to be a leader, you need to be able to present in front of people and convey your ideas in a way that's emotional and connects with people. So that's really wonderful. Just and then also seeing different people being able to get up there and speak from different cultural backgrounds, I think is also wonderful as role models.
Can you share with us a little bit about the magical candy bowl?
This is something that almost everybody has asked me about, because it's one of the introductions to the book. One of the things that I start with when I'm leading a team or meeting a new team is building rapport. So if you don't have good relationships with people and you're asking them to get things done, it's just not going to work. They're going to be more resistant. And people tend to want to do a good job, but you need to have a relationship with them and you need to know how to ask them to get them the best out of them. And so one of the things that I started doing actually when I was working at Ticketmaster was I actually wanted to eat a lot of candy myself, but I didn't want to, I didn't want it to go to my waistline. So at the time, Ticketmaster was really close to a Trader Joe's, which I'm not sure if you have that chain where you are, but it's a small grocery store and they have all kinds of wonderful treats. And I remember going there and I started buying them and I thought, I cannot eat these myself. Otherwise, I'm just going to be a blimp. So what I started doing without real intention was I was new to the role and I decided I was just going to start sharing the candy with people. And I was working with a lot of engineers and they were extremely reclusive and didn't want to talk to me, at least initially. But when I came around with candy, well, a lot of people started talking to me. And so it started to become a tradition where I would buy treats, I would share them. It was great because I would get some, they would get some, I would get to know people. And what happened with it, which I didn't intend to do, was that it started to establish me as a giver. So these people that I was going to work with later and would have to ask them to do things for me to help me accomplish a particular project, they started seeing me as somebody who was coming around and giving something to them. And so later on, when I asked them to do something, not only did I have more of a personal connection with them, I also ended up they ended up being more receptive to those requests because they felt like I had given them something. And so they wanted to reciprocate. And this is actually one of the principles in Robert Cialdini's book, is that idea of reciprocation, that you give and then people in kind will reciprocate back. Not the same type of task, and you wouldn't even think that that's really a benefit, but it ends up being that way, that you build a great relationship because you're giving something and you're starting with that. And so now I get compliments like at when another award was given to me, they quoted me as somebody who knows everybody's favorite snack preferences, which I do. Like when I run a big project, there's always a big snack stock of like, okay, hey guys, what do you want? Okay, you like spicy Cheetos, you like Funyuns, you like Oreos. Like we always have the best snack stash. And that builds a sense of community and an openness. And it also just builds good credibility for me and good relationships with those people. They know that I care enough to actually ask them what they like. And they know that when I'm going to be asking them for something later, that I am doing my best to give them something in exchange. So the magical candy bowl ends up being something that is a fixture on my desk, which is that as like an ongoing principle. But generally speaking, I really like to feed people on my teams, and you would be amazed at how much food makes people happy.
You speak about later in the book as well team dynamics and how they change over time, and how building rapport, building trust might be a first key step we need to take, and then over time the relationships between team members can change. I know that the Brian Tuckerman team dynamics model has some parts about it that people think are accurate and useful, and other people say, hey, there might be some changes or disagreements that we have. And what is your view on team dynamics? How does it work, and how do teams shift over time when you're working on a product or project together?
So Brian Tuckman's model is that one where they talk about the different phases of teams, and I think it goes forming, storming, norming, performing, I believe is how it goes. And I've actually adopted that paradigm quite a bit. I think about it a lot, that teams do go through these cycles. I don't think it's actually that linear. I think teams kind of move in and out of all of those different cycles at different times. And they tend to storm upon forming. So when there's like some catalyst for change that comes in, whether somebody leaves the team or somebody new comes in or somebody gets a promotion or there's a new project that comes into the team will start to storm because whatever was that they knew has changed and they need to figure out how to adjust to that. And so I think that teams are kind of constantly storming. Anytime there's a catalyst for change on the team, you kind of have to watch for, okay, how is this going to change the dynamic of the team? And should we be doing any adjustments? And if you do that well and you watch that, then you can kind of figure out how to bypass the storing phase, or at least expedite it so that it's shorter, so that you can get more to norming and performing. And so I talk about this tactic in the book that I call working agreements, which is, bringing a team together and then simply just asking them, how do you want to work together? And then trying to get them all to agree on some set of guidelines or principles for how they're going to be conducting themselves. And that is in and of itself a living and breathing working agreement, where if something changes, you kind of want to go back to it and say, okay, is this still working? Should we adjust? With software development, most teams work in Agile, which means they develop very quickly and iteratively. And so things are constantly changing, and retrospectives is another tool in Agile where you basically bring the team together and talk about how you were doing, what you could do better, what went well, what did not go well, and what you can change. And what I like to do is combine those two things, where if you decide to change something, you bring it back to the working agreement and make sure that that's codified so that you can bypass that storming phase again and try to get back quickly into norming. I guess I'd say I wish that there was a phase on the very end of it where a team kind of like morphs past performing into something even more cohesive, like a family unit or a community. And I think that teams that do stay together longer do end up in that phase where you kind of think about a family or a community, and it's like, well, they're always storming, but they really care about each other and they figure out a way to get along. And when they know each other really well, they get past those storming phases faster, and they get back to a sense of balance and performance much faster as well. And so I try to get them all the way through that into a phase where they are really caring about each other, and then, become kind of like a family unit.
During that process of evolution of a team and hopefully getting to that community or family stage where we're having robust and direct challenges, questions, debates. I mean, that's kind of the ideal for working as a team, right? We kind of hash it out together, but then in the end, we're all working towards one goal. You pointed to something in the book, which I think is a really important leadership concept, especially for younger leaders or developing leaders, which is managing or navigating trade-offs. It's an essential leadership skill, and it's difficult because you can't make everyone happy in every instance. Would you mind walking us through, Anne, what your roadmap is, or just some ideas and principles you have about navigating those trade-offs when you see them in the workplace?
Yeah, every day is full of trade-offs, especially if you're a leader. So I think I talk about this a lot in the book. Every good project starts with really clear goals. Unambiguous goals, I think, is the phrase that I use. And it's about defining something that everybody is on board with trying to achieve. So, and making it so clear that when you use that, you can use it as an anchor for everything that you're trying to do. And so what happens over the course of a project, inevitably, is that every day there are going to be choices that you need to make where you're not going to be able to do all the things that everybody wants. And especially if you're trying to deliver under a specific timeline, which all projects have, you want to try to figure out, okay, what's the core thing that I need to do that's going to make the biggest impact against the goal that I'm trying to achieve? And so the guidance that I would give people in general is, when you're faced with choices, what you always want to do is tie it back to where you're trying to go, and whether or not the things that you're looking at help you boost that goal, and what gets you the furthest. In the book, I give like examples where you can use like a different axis of like speed versus, speed versus quality as an example. It's like a classic trade-off. I can either have it fast or I can have it worked well, but I can't necessarily have both in, let's say, a week time frame. And so you need to decide what you're trying to achieve. In a project where the main goal is to get it out the door quickly so that you can be first in market and get learnings quickly, then quality may not matter so much. Eventually it will in terms of product maturity, but you can make decisions like that where you're like, well, really the objective of this is to get it out the door so that I can learn, because I have a long-term goal to have a sustainable product, not to build something that's so robust that by the time I get it out the door, I don't know whether or not customers will even want it. And so I think using those frameworks to make those trade-offs is really helpful, as long as you're always anchoring back to what was the original intention of what I was trying to achieve, and does this thing actually help me achieve that goal? And if you are really connected to what that goal is, you can provide guidance as a leader for those trade-offs intraday. That's where you add a ton of value as a project leader.
What other leadership lessons have you really taken away and from your journey? What's maybe one or two key things that you remember today that you would want other people to learn from your successes and challenges?
I read this book that's called Great Boss, Dead Boss. It's a very unique title. It's by an author named Ray Immelman, and I had seen him lecture at a project management conference one time. The book itself is not my favorite book in a lot of ways, because of the way it's written. It's written as like an analogy throughout, and it's a story that teaches a ton of lessons. But the lessons have been really powerful and have stayed with me for quite some time. So in that way, I recommend it. And at the end of the book, one of the things that he says that's very compelling to me is that as a leader, your limiting beliefs are actually the limit to your beliefs also limit the potential to anything that you lead. And I find that to be like a very powerful statement. It's like, oh, that's true. If I don't believe that it can happen, it will never happen, because I'm the person who's actually leading other people. And so one of the lessons that I've taken away in my career is that you should always look for people who believe that you can do more than you think that you can do. And who like break the ceiling on your belief system, because, if they can see beyond that and they can coach you beyond what you can see, then that will grow you. And then that will also grow your ability to grow everybody else who looks to you for leadership. I think that's such a powerful lesson. And I carry it with me all the time, where I'm looking for people who can serve as inspiration or who can challenge my thinking and ask me, are you sure that you can't do that? Like they'll push me a little bit. Um, it's hard to always push yourself, and in particular, it's almost impossible if you can't see it. Some people are blessed with the optimism that they can do everything, but a lot of people aren't. And especially when you're young, if your parents were really strict and you're an overachiever, you grow up with a fear of failure. Or I very much grew up with a fear of failure. Like I never want to fail. It's like not in my blood. And so if I see that moment where it's possible for me to fail, it's like, I can't do that. But finding somebody who can tell you, like, first of all, it's okay to fail, because when you do, that's where you know where your limits are. And second of all, it's not a failure until you stop. So you can try and fail once, but that doesn't mean you can't try again. And if you can find people who can tell you, like, yes, you can do that, you can go further, that's going to grow you as well as anybody else that you lead.
That's such a powerful insight, Anne. And I think it's a great reminder to us, whether we're project leaders or teammates or family members or community members, that sometimes it does help to challenge and push our teams and our peer leaders and even senior leaders to think bigger and to think more broadly. I know that for me personally, I tend to generally be a conflict avoidant person if I can help it. I don't like saying to somebody, "Hey, like you can do better. I want to challenge you to do it." I feel like it's almost too assertive or overly like it's not my place to be. But that's such a powerful visual, which is right the limitation that we set for ourselves. Sometimes we need somebody else to really just say, "Hey, maybe you can open that up and think a little bit more broadly."
Yeah, I find the most inspirational people that I meet are those that will challenge and tell me, like, you can do 10 times more than you're doing. And I'm like in total disbelief. But it really takes somebody who's like pushing you, like, you're thinking way too small. You can think a lot bigger than what you're doing, to get you to those levels. And I think every person that I've encountered has left like a really big imprint on me when they've challenged me to think beyond that. And I think that there's no way that I would be where I am in my career without mentors who helped me see past what I thought were my own limits.
Well, Anne, I know we're just about to wrap up on time here. Would it be possible to share any other thoughts or lessons you'd care to share with our audience, and then wrap up with something that you've learned recently as well? Because I know you're an avid leader and learner.
Yeah, so What I would say is one of the things that's the best thing about this time in our lives, and I know there's a lot of hardship happening right now. We have the pandemic that we've been dealing with. One of the best things that I've learned during the pandemic is that it's not limiting our ability to grow. And in fact, we're in a state where there's more information out there than there's ever been. And anything that you want to learn, you can have access to so many resources about it. So there are podcasts like this that are wonderful. There are books, there are articles, there are blogs, there are courses that you can take that are now just people putting their own thoughts out there. My book actually started out as a self-published endeavor where you can now just self-publish a book if you want to write it. There's no barrier to having to get a traditional publisher to publish you. I ended up getting a traditional publisher very luckily, but it wasn't something that limited me from doing those things. And we're just in an age right now where there's so much more that's possible because there's so much information at your fingertips. And so it's hard for me to pinpoint one thing, like one particular fact that I've learned, but one thing that I have generally learned is that anything that I want to learn, I can learn. There are so many resources available to me, and even like communities. So when I was actually trying to go through the process of writing this book, Glue, I didn't know how to write a book. And then I realized there are Facebook books and groups out there that I can join that had other first-time authors that were trying to go through the process. There were resources out there in terms of like courses for first-time authors, articles, tons of blogs on Medium. I mean, there was just so much information available to me, and that becomes very empowering. So what I would say to anybody out there is like, outside of just a leadership lesson in general, as people and students and people who are growing infinitely for their lives, you have the ability to continue to learn and grow every day in any subject that you want to learn about. The resources are available. And so take advantage of that, just because you're sitting at home, because you're quarantined or, not going out as much as you were before. It opens up a new world of opportunity in a way that didn't exist before.
That sounds right there like a reminder to think 10 times bigger in terms of our own learning. I
It
think we just
does.
got the kick in the butt that we needed right there.
I hope so. I hope you'll pick up my book, Lou, and read it and to learn something about it. And then I hope it inspires you to write your own book or do something that you didn't think you could achieve before.
Well, Anne, thank you so much for your time. Wishing you all the best and hoping that we have that we have a significant increase in Glue leaders very shortly.
I hope so too. That would be so wonderful. Thank you for having me, Mike.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.